Hi, I'm Jo Clark, and thanks so much for joining me today. This is the Redefining Midlife podcast, a podcast designed for the 40-plus woman who is determined to challenge society's myths and beliefs around midlife. It's for the woman who is inspired and ready to define midlife her way. Join me each week as I chat to health and wellness experts for up-to-date information on how to live well, as well as some special conversations with incredible everyday women redefining what midlife can look like. Here's to making our next half of life even better than the first. I'm so very proud to say that this podcast has reached the big milestone of 50 episodes. And given 90% of podcasts don't even get past 3 episodes, and 90% of those left don't make it past 20 episodes, showing up each week is quite rare in the podcast world. And I know why, because it takes time, it takes effort, money, commitment, and grit to produce an episode. And I must say that I'm proud that I'm one of the few in podcast land that is so determined to keep going. I'm also very proud of what I've achieved with the podcast since that very first episode was released at the end of August 2022. Over the past 49 episodes, I've had the pleasure and the privilege to interview some incredible women who are just like you and I. Women who are quietly and modestly changing their lives for the better, as well as for those around them. These are women who have decided to redefine their second half of life and completely change the direction of their lives and take a brave leap into the unknown. Now, we often hear our own story in theirs, and this gives us the feeling that we aren't alone and that we can also create a life that's fulfilling for us. And I've also been able to meet and chat with a wide range of women who are leaders in the field of health and wellness. Incredibly accomplished women who openly share their knowledge with us so that we can live our best lives. And I'd like to thank all of my guests, but I especially want to thank and acknowledge every single one of you who is a listener. Anyone who has shared the podcast with others, anyone who has rated and reviewed this podcast. It truly does mean the world to me. You are the very reason why this podcast exists, and you are why I'm determined to continue. I'm absolutely passionate about making this second half of life the best for you and I. And I have so many incredible guests coming up that will help make this possible. So make sure that you've subscribed so that you don't miss any of them. Now, rather than marking the 50th episode with something special, I decided to have a celebration for episode number 55 because that's how old I am. And I thought it was only fitting to celebrate both of those special numbers together. Up until then, I've got a couple of special ones for you to listen to that include the top 5 episodes released so far. So to mark this special 50th milestone episode, I'll be resharing the most downloaded episode that I've ever released, which was number 14, Perimenopause, Puberty in Reverse. Now, this is a short episode and gives a great introduction to the stage of life that I can safely say the vast majority of us have little or no awareness until it knocks loudly on our door. So enjoy. I'm going to be talking about perimenopause, which is often likened as puberty in reverse. It's a natural stage and part of life for women anywhere from their late 30s, their 40s, and into their 50s. Yet, this is a stage that takes most of us by absolute surprise. Now, perhaps you've heard about menopause and not perimenopause. And if you're like me and the majority of women, you probably thought that menopause just happened when you're in your 50s, maybe you'd get some hot flushes, and then perhaps your period would just stop after a certain amount of time. But as you may or may not have discovered, it's way more than that. And it's something that I wished I knew a lot more of before I reached this stage of my life. Today, I'm just going to introduce some basic information about perimenopause because it's a huge topic and it's going to be one that I'll be covering in more detail in future episodes. Knowing more about this stage of life is not only important for women, it is also super important for anyone who lives with or works with or is in a relationship with a person who has menstrual cycles. So basically that covers everyone. Firstly, why is it likened to puberty in reverse? Well, if you wound back the clock to the start of your puberty, plenty of hormonal changes were beginning to happen without you even knowing it. Subtle changes in your body and your mood happened well before your period started. And again, if you cast your mind back to those early adolescent years and remember how old you were when you got your period and how old your friends were, you would have noticed that everyone would have been at a different age and stage. Some of your friends may have been similar to you, some were early starters, and some were late bloomers.
And it would have taken you a few years for your body to get into a rhythm and for you to adjust to this new stage of life. Every girl went through puberty, but how it was for you was entirely unique. Perimenopause is basically the same, but in reverse. It's the winding down of those hormones rather than the ramping up of the hormones. Recently, I was away at my annual girls' weekend, and ironically, these are the very women I went through puberty with all of those decades ago. We had a few good chats over the weekend talking about this topic, and everyone's experiences have been and still are totally different. And it never ceases to amaze me just how unique we all are. Now, before I go any further, I'm just going to go over a few key terms so we're all on the same page. The term perimenopause refers to the transition years we go through before we reach menopause. And there are also a number of phases throughout this transition. The term menopause is actually only referring to one day. It's the day 12 months after your last period. After this day, you're in postmenopause, and you'll remain in this stage for the rest of your life. So you could be 30, 40, 50 or more years in the postmenopause stage of life. Now, like with puberty, perimenopause starts happening without you even realizing. And then slowly but surely, you'll no doubt notice some changes. Now, what you experience may be entirely different, or it could be similar in some or even many ways to your friends and family. You don't actually know until you start to go through it. Now, here are some of the basic Peri 101 facts. Perimenopause may begin as early as the age of 35, and it can end as late as 59. So, to give you some context on how different the ages can be, 20% of women have symptoms of perimenopause by the time they get to 40. And then on the other end of the spectrum, take me for example, I'm almost 55 and I am still going through perimenopause. The length of perimenopause can range anywhere from 2 to 10 or more years. And the average age of reaching menopause is 51. But for around 8% of women, it occurs by the age of 45. So again, there's that huge variability. Now, even if your cycles are regular now, your normal experiences can begin to change. However, some women might have a different experience altogether due to surgical or medical interventions or treatments. So, for example, if you've had a partial hysterectomy and you have your ovaries intact, you're still going to go through those phases of the perimenopause transition and have symptoms, although you won't have a bleed to signal what's going on. Likewise, if you have a Mirena or you're on the pill, you're going to be guided by the symptoms of perimenopause. And speaking of symptoms, there are well and truly over 30 symptoms of perimenopause. And many of these are temporary and they can change over time. Now, as I said earlier, perimenopause is a natural stage of a woman's life. It's a sequence of events that starts with a lower progesterone paired with high and often wildly fluctuating estrogen. Over time, that estrogen level will begin to remain low and stay low. And in the final stage, for some women, there may also be significant changes to their insulin metabolism. Because your hormones are in a constant state of flux, using a blood test to determine whether you are in perimenopause isn't recommended. Instead, identifying the changes that you experience is best practice. If you would like more information about these changes, I've got an online quiz with a free information pack that I can send to you that will help you with all about these symptoms. So head to joeclarkcoaching.com/quiz. How your body is going to cope with these hormonal changes is going to be unique to you. And it can also change from phase to phase, year to year, month to month, and cycle to cycle. There's also lots of variability that can be based on your heritage, your family history, or medical treatments such as radiotherapy or chemotherapy. Now, symptom-wise, we know that 20% of women are going to sail through perimenopause with very few symptoms. 60% of women will have mild to moderate symptoms. And 20% of women are going to have severe symptoms that are going to significantly interfere with their daily life. A key takeaway for every woman needs to be this. The years of perimenopause and the first couple of years postmenopause need to be seen as a critical window for your health. By focusing on your health and wellness now, it's going to help to manage many of those symptoms, as well as stopping small health problems from turning into larger and more permanent health problems in the future. And given that the average life expectancy for an Australian woman is now 85.4 years, we've got a lot of life left to live. Considering and implementing ways to support our physical and our mental health now is going to help us live a more full and vibrant life post-menopause. Now, as I said earlier, this is a huge topic, and it's one that I'm going to cover in more detail in future episodes with peri and postmenopause experts, as well as chatting with other women about their personal experiences. One thing I really want you to keep in mind as well is that although this stage can be a time of great flux and change, it can also be one of the most empowering times in a woman's life. And this is a very reason why I created this podcast. I hope that today's episode was helpful to you. And I really hope that understanding what happens to our bodies during this stage of life is going to be commonplace conversations that you can have. And it's only through learning and talking openly about it that we can make it happen. So if you know someone who would benefit from hearing some of this basic information covered in the episode, please be a great girlfriend and share it with them. Likewise, if you or someone you know has an inspirational midlife story to share in an episode, I'd love to hear from you as well. So ladies, until next week, take care. Thanks so much for listening and sharing your time with me today. I'd love you to hit subscribe on Apple Podcast or your favorite podcast app to keep spreading these empowering messages. Please share this podcast with other incredible midlife women in your world. Join me again next week for another redefining midlife conversation. Thanks again for tuning in.